This is Adrian Cole. Adrian Cole was never the kid teachers pointed to when they talked about potential. He sat near the window, half listening, half watching dust drift through sunlight. His grades were fine, nothing special. He didn't raise his hand often. He didn't speak loudly. If you asked people who knew him growing up, they would have said he was quiet, maybe thoughtful, but never smart, not in the way people usually mean it. Adrian grew up in a household where stress was constant but never discussed. His mother worried out loud about money. His father carried silence like a second job. Arguments were short but sharp like sudden storms. Adrian learned early that reacting quickly only made things worse. If he spoke too fast, he said the wrong thing. If he defended himself, the room grew colder, so he learned to pause, to listen, to think before he opened his mouth. In school, this made him invisible. Loud kids were noticed, confident kids were praised, kids with quick answers were labeled intelligent. Adrian didn't compete with them. He didn't try to prove anything. When he didn't understand something, he asked questions after class quietly without trying to sound clever. When he failed a test, he didn't panic. He went home and tried to understand what actually went wrong. After graduation, life didn't suddenly reward him. He bounced between average jobs, retail, admin work, a short stint in sales that drained him faster than it paid him. But something strange kept happening. Whenever there was a problem, people came to Adrian. When a coworker was overwhelmed, they sat next to him. When tensions rose in meetings, eyes drifted toward him. Not because he talked the most, but because when he did speak, things calmed down. Adrian noticed it before anyone else named it. He wasn't smarter in the traditional sense. He didn't know more facts. He didn't memorize more information. But he processed things differently. Stress didn't hijack him. Disagreement didn't threaten him. Silence didn't scare him. And slowly, without trying to, he became someone others trusted to think clearly when emotions ran high. Years later, someone once asked him directly, "How do you always seem to know what to do?" Adrian laughed because he didn't feel like he knew anything special. He just felt like he wasn't rushing, and that question stayed with him. What if being smart was never about knowing more, but about thinking differently? And if that's true, how many people are calling themselves not smart when they've never been taught how smart people actually think? We grow up believing intelligence is a kind of storage. More facts, more answers, faster responses. We imagine smart people as walking encyclopedias, always ready with the right thing to say. But when we look closer, the people who handle life best aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who stay calm when others spiral, the ones who don't collapse under pressure, the ones who don't turn every disagreement into a war. The real difference isn't knowledge, it's how the mind moves. Most people think intelligence is loud, quick, assertive, but real intelligence is often quiet, slow, deliberate. It's the ability to step back instead of jumping in, to observe instead of react, to think in systems instead of moments. One of the biggest mistakes we make is believing that being smart means always being right. So we defend our opinions like our identity depends on it. Someone challenges us and suddenly it's not about the idea anymore. It's about ego, about winning, about proving we're not stupid. Smart thinkers don't play that game. Smart. When someone disagrees with them, they don't feel attacked. They feel curious. Instead of tightening their grip on their position, they loosen it. They ask questions. Not to trap the other person, but to understand how that person arrived where they are. They're not afraid of being wrong because being wrong doesn't threaten who they are. This changes everything. Conversations stop feeling like battles. People lower their defenses. Ideas actually evolve. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to win, people are more likely to listen to you. Not because you dominate the room, but because you make it safe to think out loud. Most minds don't change under pressure. They change under understanding. Another quiet habit of intelligent thinkers is their ability to zoom out. Where most people see isolated events, they see patterns. One bad day doesn't define a life. One failure doesn't define ability. One rejection doesn't define worth. When something goes wrong, the average reaction is emotional compression. Everything collapses into that one moment. I failed, so I'm bad. They said no, so I'm not enough. This didn't work, so nothing ever will. But smarter thinkers pull the camera back. They ask different questions. What led to this? What variables are involved? What's actually within my control here? They treat setbacks like data, not verdicts, information to analyze, not proof of inadequacy. This is why they seem calm under pressure. Not because they don't care, but because they're not drowning in the moment. They're standing above it, looking at where it fits in the larger picture. And that perspective is powerful. One of the biggest energy leaks in most people's lives is worrying about things they cannot change. Other people's opinions, the past, random outcomes, hypothetical futures. We burn mental fuel on scenarios we have no influence over, then wonder why we're exhausted. Intelligent thinkers are ruthless with their attention. If something is outside their control, they don't give it space in their mind. Not because they're cold, but because they're efficient. They know attention is a finite resource. And every minute spent worrying about the uncontrollable is a minute stolen from action. They redirect their focus. What can I do right now? What choice is actually mine? What's the next small step that moves this forward? This doesn't make life perfect, but it makes it manageable. It turns anxiety into action. And then there's silence. Silence scares people. We rush to fill it because it feels like exposure, like weakness, like we're being judged. So we talk, we ramble, we interrupt, we say things we haven't fully thought through just to avoid the discomfort of quiet. But intelligent thinkers are comfortable in silence. They let it breathe. They pause before answering. They listen without planning their next sentence. They give conversations space to unfold instead of forcing them forward. This does something subtle but profound. It makes their words carry weight. When they speak, people pay attention. Not because they speak often, but because they speak intentionally. Silence becomes a tool, not a threat. And perhaps the most important habit of all is their relationship with reaction. Most people live reactively. Stimulus response. Someone says something, emotion flares, words spill out. A situation goes wrong, frustration takes over, decisions are made in heat. This isn't a character flaw, it's human. But it's also optional. Smart thinkers build a pause between what happens and how they respond. Sometimes it's just a breath, sometimes it's a few seconds of internal questioning. Is this worth my energy? What response serves me best here? What outcome do I actually want? That pause changes everything. It turns reflex into choice. It shifts power back into their hands. While others are controlled by emotion, they're guided by intention. And this is why they seem unshakable. Not because nothing affects them, but because they don't let everything control them. If you're listening to this and thinking you're not smart enough to live this way, that's the lie we've been taught. None of this requires a perfect memory. None of it requires top grades or advanced degrees. It requires awareness, attention, practice. Halfway through this, pause with me for a moment. If this way of thinking already feels different from how you usually move through life, share this with someone who's always stressed, always reactive, always doubting their intelligence. Not to lecture them, but to let them know there's another way to think and it's learnable. The truth is, most people never practice these habits because no one tells them intelligence can be trained. We treat it like a fixed trait, something you either have or you don't. But thinking is a skill, and skills improve with repetition. When you stop arguing to win and start asking to understand, your conversations change. When you stop collapsing under single moments and start looking for patterns, your confidence stabilizes. When you stop worrying about everything and focus on what you can influence, your energy returns. When you embrace silence, your words sharpen. When you pause instead of reacting, your decisions improve. This is what real intelligence looks like in daily life. Quiet, grounded, intentional. And the shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens choice by choice. One pause, one question, one moment where you don't react the way you always have. Most people won't do this. They'll keep reacting, keep arguing, keep worrying, not because they're incapable, but because habits are comfortable, even when they're harmful. But if you choose even one of these ways of thinking and practice it for a week, you'll notice something change. Situations won't feel as overwhelming. People will respond differently to you. You'll feel more in control, not because life got easier, but because your mind got clearer. Adrian never became the loudest person in the room. He never chased the image of being smart, but over time he became someone others relied on when things mattered. Not because he knew more, but because he thought better. And maybe that's the real question worth sitting with. If intelligence isn't about what we know, but how we think, what would change in our lives if we started practicing these habits today, instead of assuming we're just not smart enough?